Getting a project over the line is harder than it looks. The real work happens behind the scenes. Today, we meet someone who holds it all together. Welcome, Krystal, to the 20-Minute Career.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you as well. Today, we're going to be talking about project implementation. And I'd like it if maybe you could explain to us what that actually means in really simple terms.
Yeah, of course. So, when an organization needs to make a change internally, whether that's launching a new technology or there's a new policy that needs to be created and then implemented within a business, a project or implementation manager plays the role of coordinating what that looks like end to end. So that starts all the way, if we think of it in terms of a technology or systems implementation, starts all the way from understanding the scope of what needs to be changed, what the options are to change to, and then going through the project lifecycle. So, working with the broader team to build the solution, to roll out the solution, and then to embed the solution. And yeah, my role as an implementation manager is really looking after that end to end.
So tell me a little bit about how you got into your career and when you look back on your career, what did the path look like? What was important to get there?
It certainly wasn't linear. So in high school, my subjects were always very focused around kind of your science, maths, English, which meant that when it came time for university selection, I was really siloed into a science biomed type pathway based on that subject selection. And that was definitely an area of interest, which is why I kind of went down that. So I actually did a Bachelor of Science at university. But when I got to university, I realized that perhaps that interest was more surface level than I had initially thought. But I was at that point too far into my degree to in at what I thought at the time to make any
Yeah.
changes.
And I guess
Yeah,
a lot of people do that, right? A lot of people's careers isn't linear. So you're a good example of that.
yeah, absolutely. In
Mm,
fact, what I find now that most people don't have very linear career pathways.
absolutely.
But I was also working part time at the time in a finance setting, and I really enjoyed elements of both of those things, my job and my studies. But I knew that neither one was the pathway that I wanted to follow. So, what I really
Mm,
enjoyed about uni and science was the ability to be curious. I loved analytics. So I actually majored in analytics, which is a stream of science. So data is a
mm.
stream of science as well, where I got to be really investigative and deep dive into kind of analysis. And that's where the analysis side of my brain really, like, I identified that's something I'm interested in. I'm deeply curious as a human, and I love being able to problem solve ultimately. And from my job, I loved interaction with people. And I knew, like, hey, banking might not be for me. Neither is purely living in an analytical world where I don't get to surface from the numbers. So, what can I do that will give me the best of both? Like, what sort of jobs exist where I could do a little bit of both? And essentially, for me, that meant doing some research on my own independently around emerging careers. So, what careers are kind of new in Australia that I can start to think about branching into? And it was actually change management that came up when I had a look.
Mm.
Um, and working in a very large financial organization, I actually had the opportunity to look at our internal directory and reach out to someone in the organization who had that title. And that was such a cold reach out, and I was so nervous to do it.
Mm.
I said, hey, you don't know me. I do work in this organization, and I would love 15 minutes of your time to talk through what you do and how you got there. And I actually got that time with her, and she made that time, and I was so incredibly grateful. And most of the time, people will make the time if you reach out. So I sat down, really quick chat, understanding what she does now. I'm really grateful she made that time. And we spoke through her career pathway. So she talked me through how she got into that role. And
Yeah.
that was actually a pathway that I was looking at anyway. And that was to move out of the area that I worked in and to focus more on a operational career to get an entry into the world of HR technology. And that's what I did.
Okay. Great. It's really important, I think, and a lot of people take it for granted, reaching out to people, their understanding of what their pathway's been and how you can leverage them to get to where you need to be.
After that point, maybe another 2 to 2.5 years before I got to where I wanted to be and started my journey in the project and change world. But that those 2 years were really curated. I had a plan. I had an end in sight. I knew what I wanted to get to, and kind of every move I made from there on out was with that in mind.
Okay, great. So when you're at work on an average Tuesday, talk us through what it is that you do.
So my time is really focused on where I am in a project life cycle. So essentially, when we have our projects, we run them um, definitely not in any sort of linear way, but we run them in the way that makes sense at pace. And
Yeah.
that means that every day looks a little bit different. So for me, I'm very focused on where are we up to in our goal, like what needs to be done by our goal squad, what needs to be communicated to our stakeholders, what problem are we solving for today.
Mm.
So part of my role involves communication, so keeping our stakeholders really up to date with where we're at. It involves actually engaging them for their decisions, for their input. I work really closely with the goal squad or our project team to direct where they need to be spending their time and their attention. So I have to have like this bird's eye view of where we are in that life cycle of a project
Yeah.
and all of the other moving parts that coincide and need to happen for something to successfully launch. So it could be on that particular day, diary management, scheduling different milestones in a goal, and then making sure that all the right squads are there to really meet them. It could be working with vendors. So day to day, my role changes, but that's what keeps it really interesting.
Okay. So working in squads, you're working in an agile type of way. Maybe just for our listeners who probably don't understand agile, can you give a quick 60-second at the most explanation of?
Yeah, sure. So agile is a project methodology that works in more sprint based approaches. And what I mean by sprint based approaches is we're not waiting for one task to end before another begins. And you typically have those two main project methodologies. So you have your agile and you have your waterfall, which is really traditional stage gatey type project management. I'd like to say we don't work with either. At the
Okay.
moment. So we have a very hybrid approach. But what we don't do is wait for a blocker before we move to our next stage gate. So we don't wait for something to be completely unblocked before we move forward. And that's what I mean by when I say we work in an agile way.
Okay, great. So when you think about components of your role, Krystal, what would people not necessarily see? What are some of the things that exist under the surface?
I think that would be around developing your own interpersonal skills, which come into play in this role and this career pathway more than anywhere else that I've seen. Um, so
Yeah.
things like organization, communication, your ability to be flexible in the way that you think. Those are all skills that are equally important and need to be considered than like your actual, technical skills.
Mm.
So I think for me, it's in whatever people are studying or doing at school or in university, you need to hone those skills just as much as the technical ones. So my role involves a great deal of analysis that doesn't happen on paper but happens in my brain.
Yeah.
So I need to be able to understand the impact of actions or inaction to be able to make sure a project flows smoothly. I need to be able to anticipate where there might be blockers in a project lifecycle. I need to make sure that my communication is really considered and that I'm anticipating stakeholder needs. So all of that, and then I need to be organized enough to make that actually happen. So I think under the hood, there is a heavy reliance in my role on more intuitive skills than technical skills.
Mm. I guess that's where you're leveraging your problem solving ability and to be able to identify things like risk and so forth in advance,
Absolutely.
or blockers, as you said. What is it that keeps you in your role day to day? And was there a point in time where you thought to yourself, this is why I do what I do, and this is why I get a lot of energy and enjoyment out of coming to work every day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to think of it. One of my old leads actually said, we're not saving lives, but we sure are changing them. And that is a big part of what energizes me and brings me back day in and day out. I think when you're working in technology implementations, especially, it's very easy to lose sight of your end user or your customer, or who's benefiting from this change. And I
Mm.
think for me, that's where those skills came in from my role in finance, where I loved the people element of my job. I
Yeah.
I still love that and I still get that with this career. So I stay very close to our end user to make sure that user experience is exactly what we want it to be and really true to why we're making a change or bringing in a new platform in the first place. So when I get to see end users engaging with what we've launched or delivered, that for
Mm.
me is what really keeps me excited, keeps me energized in this role. I'll give you
Mm.
an example. We have just launched a new wellbeing platform that provides our employees with access to therapy and coaching if they need it. And alongside that, we've implemented a whole new program to support employees and their loved ones. So for me, that is a rollout that has a very tangible output that influences the well-being
Yeah.
of my colleagues. And while that piece of work has taken months and months to deliver, what's kept me energized on a day-to-day basis is the importance and reality of work that we're doing. So it's very easy to think about, hey, we're whacking in a new system or we're launching a new platform. But really, the why behind it is what drives me in my role.
Absolutely. So true. I think that there's a lot of organisations that tend not to think about what is the problem that they're trying to solve before they throw technology at it. Because there's no point in implementing a new technology, a new program, unless it's going to be utilised at the very end, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Hmm. So, what I'd like to move on to now is just what I call the final fast five. So, it's 5 quick questions to sort of just get you thinking. So, we'll kick off. So, first one, what's the most overrated thing about your job?
Uh, you get a seat at the table with some of the big decision makers, and sometimes those people don't have as much clarity as you would need them to have or you think they would have. So you end up doing a lot of the guiding through that phase.
What's the most underrated thing?
I think definitely the direct link to impact on end users. I think it's very easy to kind of live in project land and you kind of
Mm.
sometimes forget for a moment that hey, there's a real person at the end of this journey.
Mm. What's the biggest mistake you may have made early on in your career that you've learned from?
Uh taking it personally. So when you launch a new system, I think there's a lot of thoughts and feelings and opinions about that system, especially as people move through the change life cycle and feeling all of the feelings along the change curve. I think the mistake I made was probably taking it personally when I shouldn't have. If they don't know you personally, don't take it personally. And that is the best advice I've received in my life.
It's a great piece of advice. What's the coolest thing that you've ever done in your job?
I think launching a real like 360 moment for me was launching a new applicant tracking system, which is a platform that candidates and recruiters use to go through an interview process, among many other things. That was a really cool moment for me to be able to see and put into place all of the things that would have helped me as a recruiter. That was a really cool presentation to work on.
And what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
That it is okay to make changes to what you are doing, and that if you do make a change, you will land where you're supposed to be, and you will find something that you both enjoy and are good at.
It's been great having you on the podcast today, Krystal. Thank you very much for giving me 20 minutes of your time.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.